has some, we're spiffing up our Zoom calls here with some graphics. But a couple announcements before I turn it over to our guest speaker. Reminder to keep your Zoom on mute until we open it up for Q&A. You don't have to use your camera for the meeting, but we do like to see you. And a couple of club announcements. First of all, I want to thank Greg Silver. Title is Environmental Leader, Attorney, Butler Bulldog, and supporter of Black Lives Matter. He's sponsoring our July programs, and Greg, we really appreciate that. And if anyone else has an interest in sponsoring future programs, let Taylor know. We have postponed all of our member dues until October 1st. And again, all of our in-person club meetings have been canceled through September 10th. And again, the board continues to monitor COVID statistics here in Indiana. And, you know, we all want to meet in person again, but we're being very cautious about doing so. So we will keep you posted and make the best decisions possible and considering our club. We are really close to our legacy campaign, $105,000 goal. We've raised $93,000. Nothing would be happier for me as I end my presidency here, October 1, which by the way is great news for you. I have only 3 more months left. I'm entering my last quarter as your president, but really would love to at least get to the 100,000 mark with our campaign. Very important right now for our foundation in terms of supporting community organizations. And again, in lieu of not paying for lunches right now, you might consider making a donation to the campaign as well. Also want to announce, and I appreciate Taylor and Trina and Tina putting this together. We've got a volunteer project coming up. We're going to be writing letters and notes to our Circle K and Key clubs. Taylor, do you mind expounding on that a little bit?
There, to get myself off mute. Yeah, we're just thinking about writing some encouraging notes to some of our Key clubbers and Circle K members and Builders Club, just sending them a note. And so you'll see the newsletter on Monday. You'll just sign up if you want to do that, and we'll send you some envelopes or some note cards and an envelope to send back to our office, and then we'll take care of dispersing them. So just a little something we can do to help out.
Fantastic. Do we have any guests joining us? If you're a guest, we'd love to hear from you and a little bit about you. So if you are a guest, please chime in. Okay, I take it we don't have any guests. I'm missing the Jamaica contingent today. Maybe they'll join us here in a little bit.
Hi, I'm Michelle Eddington from Wawasee Kiwanis. We have tree guys outside working, so I kept muted. But yep, so we've joined about 3 or 4 times, some different ones from our group. So we were invited by Taylor and Jay Brill. Jay comes up to the lakes, and so we see him up here, and he is a member of the Indianapolis Kiwanis.
Terrific. Any other guests today?
Hey guys, this is Jester from California, a member of the Davis Kiwanis Club. So I've been keeping in touch with the Zoom meetings. I've been attending for a month, so thank you for having me. And just want to say I'm going to enjoy the talk today.
Terrific. Trina, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you to, thank you, by the way, for our graphics there. Appreciate those. And if we can, I'm about to turn it over to our speaker here, who I really want to thank. There he is. And I'm honored that David White is joining us. In my 8 years here at Butler, David is one of the favorite people I've met. And I've met hundreds of people from Butler. I don't know if David recalls, we met at a bar following the Georgetown Butler game years back. And he is a great Butler supporter, and I've given him the title of the most passionate Butler fan who's not an alum, although he did win a alumni award a couple years ago, which was well deserved for his support. He's very involved with our New York City alumni chapter. Unfortunately, he also happens to be the biggest critic of our basketball program when we're not playing well. And I'm usually the brunt of his frustration about why we miss free throws or miss box outs or miss defensive assignments. And I always try to remind him that I don't play for the team. I just work for Butler.
Will my rebuttal time be counted against my presentation time here today or no?
No, we've got plenty of time, but I do want to give you his formal bio, which reads like a novel. So I'm gonna take some excerpts from it. But David White is a nationally recognized innovator in the access to justice movement, a former federal court complex commercial litigator and white-collar criminal defense attorney. Seton Hall University recruited him from private practice of law in 2010 to establish the conflict management program. Throughout his tenure, David has established strategic partnerships which provide no-cost legal assistance to vulnerable populations. These include the United States Southern District Court of New York, Representation and Mediation Practicum, the U.S. District Court for the District of New Jersey, Settlement Conference Practicum, and the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority. And, really applicable to today's presentation, he champions the application of law enforcement crisis negotiation techniques to efficient outcomes in the boardroom and courtroom. He is among a discrete number of civilians to have trained with the FBI Crisis Negotiation Unit, the New York City Police Department, which I believe both of his brothers work for the NYPD.
You can see the shrine that my parents have back here to my brothers. That's nothing to do with me.
Well, we appreciate their service as well. He accepted appointment to Reengineering 2014, former Commissioner William Bratton's initiative to critically examine the day-to-day operation and long-range goals of the world's largest municipal policing agency. And he's also an active member of the NYPD's counterterrorism group. A couple last things I will mention. David is a graduate of Fordham and Fordham Law School, although again, his allegiances bleed blue and white. And also, he's an accomplished runner, and Trina will appreciate this. He is the author of the book, Negative Splits, A Middle-Aged Newbie Runner's Journey to the First Marathon.
Okay, we're good.
And he's gotten me through a couple of the Staten Island half marathons, of which, if you ever wanted to hear me curse, that last mile was not one of my finer moments. So
I think Graham spoke words that have not been uttered in the Hoosier State.
Yeah, but David, we're really honored to have you here. David's going to present, and then I know his presentation will lead to a number of questions and answers. So David, thank you for joining us, and it's all yours.
Thank you, Graham. So I want to thank Graham and the other Kiwanians of the Downtown Indianapolis Kiwanis Club for having me here today. I believe the share screen function is available to me, Graham. Yeah? Taylor?
Yes.
That's
Yep.
good then? Okay. So what I will do with your kind indulgence is to bring this up. Let's see. Okay, can everybody see that? Nod? Hands up? We're good? So what I'd like to invest some time talking with you about, and Graham tells me I have about 22 minutes at the outset, so at times I'm going to move through some of this, but I'd be delighted to take any questions, comments, or concerns afterwards. The topic that I've chosen to present to you today is Talk to Me, an introduction to crisis negotiation. And I probably have one of the cooler jobs in the entire legal academy of the 200 American Bar Association accredited law schools, largely because I have the opportunity to bring together my passion for law enforcement and negotiation, two things that more now than ever, we're talking about verbal de-escalation skills and trying to take the temperature down in the room across the United States amid great civil justice upheaval. So I like to start out with a concept called WIFM, W-I-I-F-M. And for those unfamiliar with that acronym, it's what's in it for me. And I like to say that as a member of any audience, you have the right to know whether or not what that person is going to share with you is worth the most valuable, non-renewable resource, your time. So what I'd like to share with you today are a few things. I hope that as a result of our time together, you will gain familiarity with the historic origins of crisis negotiation, and I'll define what that term means in just a moment. We'll look at the role of emotion in negotiation, how most people typically negotiate with their gut and their heart, and seldom in the first instance with their head. We'll talk about the importance of rationality and how very frequently negotiation is not about reason at all. And lastly, which is what sets me apart from any other law professor in the United States, I talk about the applicability of law enforcement techniques to both the boardroom and the courtroom. My background before I came to the law was that I worked for United Parcel Service from 1989 to 1999, and I started out as an operations employee, was promoted up through the ranks, and ultimately I became a labor and employment executive, doing a lot of work with the International Brotherhood of Teamsters on the management side of the table, and ultimately running their employment group for two of their largest worldwide facilities. So I considered myself, and to this moment I do consider myself, to be a businessman who subsequently became licensed to practice law, not a lawyer who dabbles in business. And that practitioner orientation permeates everything I do in the classroom and beyond. So at the outset, I tell you that unlike my brothers, who I'd be the first to tell you are the real heroes of my family's been involved in law enforcement, particularly with the NYPD, for 100 years as of this year. And going back to my grandfather, who did some great stuff in New York City, my dad, who was not on the NYPD, but did run a New Jersey Municipal Police Reserve organization. My mom actually worked in 3 different police departments as a civilian employee. My 2 brothers, who have been on the job for 18 years as of yesterday, as a matter of fact. I'm the one in the family that is not the sworn law enforcement professional. And I want to make that very, very plain. But for 20 years, I have had the privilege of not only growing up in a household dominated by law enforcement, but working with the NYPD through various of its organizations and departments, and also the FBI, both at Quantico, the New York field office, and the Newark, New Jersey field offices. So I make that disclosure at the very beginning. So if I'm not involved in law enforcement, or at least not as a sworn officer, why listen to me? Well, I've got 12 years of relevant experience in a very niche area. I've completed the 40-hour crisis negotiation course with the FBI Crisis Negotiation Unit, and almost no civilians get to do that. The NYPD very graciously, even before the FBI, extended an invitation to me to get involved with their hostage negotiation team, and they are the largest. They were the world's first, as I will tell you in a moment, and they remain the world's largest crisis negotiation unit. There are 114 carefully selected members of the Detective Bureau who work in that group. It's a volunteer basis. They are the creme de la creme of the NYPD negotiation unit. I've also got NYPD crisis intervention training, which started about 3 years ago. And that is a compassionate approach, which today finds its full expression in the wake of the social upheaval across the United States. It's the notion that you need not use lethality to be able to de-escalate situations in the room. And I am keenly interested in that. Our First Lady of New York, Shirlane McRae, is also in charge of something called Thrive NYC, which is an $800 million per annum initiative to try to get 250,000 of the 8.6 million New Yorkers certified as mental health first aid responders. And I'm proud to be one of those individuals. I am also, and have been for the last 7 years, an FBI crisis negotiation trainer. So when special agents come out of Quantico and are deployed to the various 56 field offices throughout the United States, I work with those teams to help those agents learn what is oftentimes a counterintuitive skill set. Last year in June, Police Scotland invited me to embed for 2 weeks with their national policing agency as a law professor in the United States and one of only 4 non-Scottish people, one of 4 non-UK residents, to sit there and give a very critical apolitical assessment of what they did well and what they might do differently. And because all of the United Kingdom, with the notable exception of Northern Ireland, has unarmed police forces, they really have to understand that words matter and verbal de-escalation counts. Back in 2013, I had the privilege to work with the Quantico Crisis Negotiation Unit. There were 6 supervisory special agents deployed there and 1 unit chief. And they cover not only the United States, but they actually break up the globe into various regions when an American citizen is taken hostage anywhere on the planet. So in 2013, I had the opportunity to partner with Quantico to design what was the first, and to this very moment remains the only law school partnership in the United States to help law students and aspiring attorneys learn substantially similar skills to those that the FBI uses to save lives on a daily basis. In 2007 actually, the American Bar Association came out with this book, which I commend to anybody that's really interested in the field of negotiation. The Negotiator's Field Book has articles from the esoteric, how many angels could dance on the head of a pin, to the very pragmatic, how do you win a landlord-tenant dispute? And I was asked to be a national spokesperson for this publication back then, and that really was the genesis of my academic interest in this topic. So when I've used the term crisis, what do we mean here? And that is, and this is just my definition, but I think it would be commonly accepted by experts in the field, a period during which an individual's normal coping skills either have failed or are failing. And I'm probably not alone, and Graham would certainly attest to this, whether it's following a tough Butler loss or just many other walks of my life. There are times that I get really passionate about things. And sometimes when passion spills over into something else, you've probably had that experience where you become just spitting angry or white-knuckled shaking with rage and you can't formulate sentences and things of that nature. That's a crisis because you're no longer ruled by reason. You're succumbing to emotions, and that's a real problem. So when we talk about that one accessory that we all carry around with us at all times, I call that the anger bucket. And again, another disclosure, in 1999, heard a consultant use this term, and I have invested best efforts to try to retrace who that consultant is. I can't find him, and I know it was a him. But the anger bucket runs thusly. Just like everybody's got that one accessory that defines them, each of us has that one invisible accessory, and that's the anger bucket. Sometimes it's bone dry and sometimes it's sloshing over, but the contents are our dashed dreams, unfulfilled aspirations, most crushing disappointments. And sometimes when you hear about disproportionate responses to seemingly trivial slights, that's because the anger bucket is sloshing over. And the insidious part of this accessory is that you can't see mine and I can't see yours. So you have no idea whether I'm living my best life today or I've had an extraordinarily challenging day, week, fortnight, year. And sometimes people just can't control themselves at that point. So here's probably one of the better slides I'll share with you today. These are two actual brain scans of the amygdala region. And the amygdala region is in the front of your brain that actually controls the fight or flight, the emotional responses to most of what we do. As you're looking at the slide, the scan on the left is where I presume, or at least I hope most of us are right now, a calm, submissive state where we're in control of our faculties. On the right side, however, is an individual who is truly in full-blown crisis. And that chemical response, that overwhelming emotion, is depicted there by the bright orange blobs, if you will. So telling somebody who is literally in that state to calm down, relax, chill out, is like trying to throw a blanket of reason on a roaring rage of emotion. It just doesn't work. And I like to compare that to if on the night before Thanksgiving, which is the largest DWI checkpoint night of the year, you were to find some friends, whether from high school or college, you went out to a bar and you had maybe 1, 2, or 10 cocktails too many, and your friend said, don't worry about it. You're only 2 miles from here. You could drive home. Leave the window down, let the cold air blow in, turn the radio up, have a stiff cup of black coffee. Well, that's lethal advice because the only thing that will get your blood alcohol level back under 0.08 is metabolizing that alcohol. So too, telling somebody who is in the state depicted by that right slide to calm down, relax, or chill out will not work. The only thing that will restore emotion or decrease emotion and restore rationality is the passage of time. And as this slide depicts, it's an inverse proportionality. So the more wound up somebody is, the greater the time is going to be. And more you will hear crisis negotiators say that the most valued resource that any of us actually have is time. In fact, Gary Nesner, who's the retired FBI unit chief, who was the second negotiator after the ATF, but first FBI negotiator on site during the 51-day Waco standoff from February 28th to April 19th, 1993, has a book which I commend to anybody that might be mildly interested in what I have to present today. And that book is called Stalling for Time. And the concept is you can't stay jacked up on adrenaline. It just crashes. And when it does, you come back to a state of rationality. but you're going to have to realize that something that we call dynamic inactivity, fighting the action imperative. The action imperative is when do something, anything, just do something now. And dynamic inactivity says we ask two questions: why and why now, if any action is to be taken. So when I use the term crisis negotiation, which is more of an umbrella term than merely hostage negotiation, we have two components. Largely, we're talking about the attempt to bring about this peaceful resolution where lives or liberty are at stake. Again, that's my own definition, but I think it would be accepted by anybody in the field. A hostage situation is the one that gets glorified in all the Hollywood and TV movies that you might see. That's a situation where a subject deprives another individual of freedom in the expectation that law enforcement will serve an instrumental role. What do we mean by that? So if a hostage negotiator rolls up on a scene and they say, what are your demands? And somebody says, I want money, I want power, I want freedom of expression, I want a bully pulpit, I want something, a means of egress. That's an instrumental purpose. You need law enforcement because but for the cop or the special agent, you're not going to get whatever it is you want or need. And of all of those situations, that's about 7 out of every 100 situations. Well, in contrast to that, we have non-hostage or barricade situations, which happen in about 93% of cases. And that's particularly problematic because in that situation, a subject deprives another individual of their freedom without any articulation of demands, and not for an instrumental, but unfortunately an expressive purpose. We almost never see women hostage takers. We almost never see women who are in barricaded situations where they threaten to do harm to other people. That is unfortunately a very male phenomenon, overwhelmingly male phenomenon. And instead of calling somebody a hostage here, we have an unfortunately accurate name, a homicide to be. And in 93% of these cases, many of which are driven by acts of domestic violence, that individual, who is almost inevitably going to be female, will be harmed either physically and certainly emotionally in the process. So when we talk about making talk work, you don't kill hostages. And you don't because they're objectified as human dollar signs. If you don't get the person back or give the person back, you don't get paid. But when you're talking about a barricaded individual, somebody standing mid-span of the Brooklyn Bridge threatening to throw themselves off, or someone who's got a knife to someone's throat or a gun to their head, they're not asking for anything. If you say, what are your demands? I have her, I'm going to kill her, kill myself, and that's the end of the day. So these are the two things we're talking about, hostage and barricade. And it's really important to understand the distinction because incident assessment is the first thing that any professional negotiator is going to do. Can talk work? Will time be our ally, or must we have a tactical entry and get in there to bring that person out, recognizing that some lives will be lost, but hopefully not many? The hostage negotiation team in the NYPD is very proud that in 1973, it became the world's first formalized hostage negotiation unit. In fact, today, if they were able to rename themselves, rebrand themselves, I'm quite confident they would call themselves the crisis negotiation team in recognition that they do more call-outs a month than the FBI and 56 field offices associated therewith do in the entirety of a year. There are 36,000 uniformed officers in the NYPD, 114 of which are in the hostage negotiation team. They came about because there were 3 incidents that have been popularized, unfortunately, which gave rise to this. So we talk about September of 1971, the Attica prison uprising in upstate New York, where then Governor Nelson Rockefeller decided that you weren't going to let the inmates take over the asylum. And as a result of that, tactical entry was made. And when Governor Rockefeller was debriefed afterwards to say, what are the teachable takeaways? What are the moments you've learned here? He said, that gas is pretty effective. So we didn't get much out of September of 1971. In August of 1972, we had the Dog Day afternoon bank robbery in Brooklyn, New York, made popular 3 years later in the 1975 Al Pacino movie of the same name. There were 2 individuals that were principally involved there, one of whom was killed. The other did a lot of time in prison for their uprising. And the third one was the September of 1972 Munich Olympic Games, which is still regarded as the darkest day in International Olympic Games history, where 11 members of the Israeli delegation were killed by a terrorist organization that came in, invaded the Olympic Village, and killed the individuals. New York has the nation's largest Jewish population, and because the Israeli delegation was so affected, it became a real problem. And the Jewish community in New York said to the NYPD, would you please help us, and can we do something better here so that we are better prepared? And that's exactly what happened. Now, I'm moving through some of this a little bit more quickly for the purpose of time, but the two principal individuals, Harvey Schlossberg and Frank Bowles, took their team and their project down to the FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit to peer review, because that's the scientific method. And they said, well, could you take a look at this? We'll come back in 2 weeks and tell us, what do you think? And they came back 2 weeks later, and those profilers that looked at this were asked, is this anything like you do in the FBI? They said, it is precisely like what we do in the FBI, because they actually stole the intellectual property. And the FBI will freely admit that they ripped off the NYPD model because they were so enamored of it. Today, in any country in the world that has a mature hostage negotiation or crisis negotiation response unit, it all goes back to the work that Bowles and Schlossberg did in New York in 1973. Now, I share this with you today as Kiwanians, not because you're likely to ever show up and negotiate at a crime scene, but because as business people, as people who care about children, you probably are familiar with some aspects of corporate negotiations. We have familiarity at the parties. We know where and when and how it's going to take place. There's probably an agenda. Well, that's not what we get in a law enforcement setting. We know nothing about the individual. We're knocking on a closed door and literally walking into what is sometimes a house on fire with nothing but chaos to try to figure out. So the vision for the future that I would ask you to consider today is, can attorneys like myself or business executives like many who I presume are with us today really learn from this? And I would say that's an unqualifiedly yes. The books that we talk about are largely drawn from the Harvard program of negotiation, and I'm privileged to have gotten my negotiation training through the Harvard Law School. The first book is the 1981 legendary classic Getting to Yes by the late great Roger Fisher and his co-author Bill Urey. 10 years later, we get Getting Past No. They're bright people, but not imaginative when they title these books. So Getting to Yes, Getting Past No. Some would argue that this book is probably the superior of the two works. And of much more recent vintage, we get a book called Never Split the Difference, which is not strictly speaking a Harvard publication, but Chris Voss is oftentimes regarded as one of the preeminent negotiators kidnapping for ransom. And he was an FBI supervisory special agent who also got his formal academic training at Harvard. Chris is a friend of mine, and I commend this book to you, although I have no pecuniary interest in any of the three works I've just commended. Active listening is regarded as the stealth weapon of the negotiator. It's the process by which we discern how we're going to connect with somebody. And frequently, active listening is displayed in things like, I hear you to say, help me to understand, correct me if I'm wrong. We're trying to listen to what somebody says to discern interest while discarding positions. There's something that's called the Behavioral Change Stairway, which I think will be of particular interest to this audience because it's applicable just about anywhere in any walk of life. We start out with that active listening. And although there are 5 steps, if you will, or 5 stairs that we're going to climb, the active listening is the first and is also the longest. The average crisis negotiation standoff in the United States is about 4 hours. By contrast, the average active shooter, active assailant incident in the United States is about 12 minutes. So we're not talking days. The Waco standoff in the Branch Davidians, or the Chaz Chop incident in Seattle, which strictly speaking wasn't even a crisis negotiation scene, are the outliers. But most of what law enforcement responds to is resolved in less than 4 hours. Of those 4 hours, 3 hours could be consumed with active listening as that first step. We then get to empathy, and empathy is very different than sympathy. We're not crying for somebody. We're not saying, oh, I feel badly for you. Empathy is when you try to find a way to recognize the validity of someone's situation. You're not standing in their shoes, but you're imagining as best you can what that would be like. And it's oftentimes counterproductive to say to somebody, I know just what you're saying. I had that experience. Because no two people will ever experience the same situation the same way. So empathy is important, but empathy is not sympathy. Building rapport. A colleague of mine likes to call that passports, and that's not the travel document, but that's the commonality that spans difference. So if Graham and I were to talk and he were our person in crisis, I would probably ask him what are some things he enjoys. Or if I were situationally aware, I might discern that good-looking Butler polo that he's wearing right now, and I might start asking about, What do you know about Butler? What do you know about basketball? What do you know about Indiana? What do you know about the heartland? I might get into questions like that with him to try to find hooks. I might ask him about where did he grow up? And because I've known Graham, been a privilege to be a friend of his for going on a decade, he could tell me a little bit about Kentucky. He could tell me about other places he's lived. He could tell me about passions he has. He could tell me about his interest in Ava Kaur, tremendous woman, a tremendous loss to the national and international community for Holocaust awareness. I would use those as passports to connect with Graham and build that rapport with him. Once I've done that, I want to gain influence. I want to be able to sway that somebody into a place. And at the risk of being a bit off color, I identify as an Irish American. And Irish diplomacy is said to be the ability to tell a person to go to hell in such a way that they'll look forward to the trip. So to gain influence with somebody is largely to say, there is a better way, no matter what's gone on. Even if you roll up to a situation where there's been domestic violence or a homicide or some felony conduct. Hey, you know, whatever happened in the past, there are great criminal defense attorneys out there. Nobody's going to judge you for that. Everybody's got a set of social stressors and everybody's got a breaking point. Today was your day. There's a brighter tomorrow. Just come on out. Let's not make this any worse. If you've actively listened, you've displayed empathy, you've built rapport, you've gained influence, then you're going to change behavior. And oftentimes that's something so simple as saying to somebody after 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, hey, do you want to come out? I promise you, you won't get handcuffed. You won't be thrown to the ground. Come on out. Let's talk about it. So that's the behavior. And ultimately, the goal of any crisis negotiation is to save lives. And that starts with the person in crisis, the people they may be keeping against their will. It could be the law enforcement officials that roll up. It could be innocent bystanders in the community. So there are 4 concepts I'd like to leave you with, which I think as I approach the end of my time would be useful for you. Number 1, hearken back to that role of emotion. Don't confuse getting even with what you, your client, or your constituency needs. As a negotiator, I don't really care what you want. I care about what you need. And that's a really important thing because a need is an interest, a want is a position. I can say, boss, I want a raise. But it's not avarice or greed that makes me want more money than I have today. It might be because I want to take care of my family. I want to make a charitable donation. I want to improve my community. So you got to drill down beyond the surface level to get past the positions and into the interests. And then and only then can you figure out what's important. But don't ever let the emotion get the better of you. And if you find out that's the case, take a break, step away from it, and resume the talks. The second of my big 4, de-escalate tensions at the table. There's a famous sports analogy, and Graham might know better than me, or saying, I should say, not sure who to attribute it to. I know it comes from cricket at one point. Control your controllables. As a negotiator, whether it's in a crisis situation or just across the table for the purchase or sale of a home, a car, resolution of an over-a-fence neighbor dispute, you have to de-escalate tensions at the table. And the only emotional control that I have is over me. I can't say whether somebody's angry at me or with me. I don't know what crushing defeats they've got. I don't know where their anger bucket is, but I know where my head's at, and I need to be in control of my emotions to take it down at the table. The third of the 4, focus on the process to achieve the outcome. I don't really care how long I have to speak with you because sometimes winning is simply not losing in this game. And there's a concept that's called verbal containment. Most people can't, do 2 things at once. If you could see that I'm doing this, right? Most people can't multitask. And if you're screaming at me, what are you not doing? Shooting her. So verbal containment is getting the attention away from the person who is the homicide to be or the person who's imperiled, focusing it on a neutral target and making talk work. And because you can't keep that adrenaline jacked up, you're going to bring it down as best you can. And the process is everything. And then lastly, remember that active listening is the least expensive, though often most effective concession that any negotiator can make. And as I conclude, if you can give me about 1 minute and 19 seconds, I have a video clip from an individual who I'm also proud to call a friend of mine, and his name is Jack Cambria. Jack is generally regarded as the godfather, the Don, if you will, of the negotiation community in the United States. And if this loads, let's see what he did for Heinz Ketchup a few years ago. I had this queued up so the commercial would not play, but let's see if it works.
I'm Jack Cambria, former NYPD crisis negotiator. I have resolved thousands of crisis situations, and I'm here to help in case you find yourself in a tough spot, like you got kids to feed and you run out of ketchup.
Oh no.
During a negotiation, your opponent will be acting on emotion. It's important to validate those emotions.
We feel your frustration. We should never have given you chicken nuggets without. Okay.
Open up an avenue of communication. Show you're ready to listen.
Talk to me. All right. One more. Honey?
If you're really in a bind and the opportunity presents itself, create a mutual enemy.
I want ketchup.
It's your mother's fault.
Seriously?
I sent her out for ketchup and she forgot.
That is not true, sweetie.
It's true.
So these are just a few of the tactics that have led to successful negotiations with some of the toughest minds out there. But just remember, the best way to win this game is not to play it. Always have a backup bottle of Heinz ketchup.
So hopefully that was at least an amusing way to conclude my remarks. But as I said, I'd be delighted offline to speak with anybody that'd like to chat about this. I'm available on LinkedIn. Graham can certainly circulate my email address to anybody that's interested. But for about 10 years, well, 10 years in the legal academy and 12 years, 13 years total, I have been one of the only people in the country to really advocate for the fact that the same techniques that law enforcement has been using to save lives can be very helpful in attaining superior outcomes in the boardroom and the courtroom. So at this time, if time permits, Graham, I'd love to answer questions.
Yeah, David, really appreciate that. Found it fascinating, and we'll open it up for questions here in a minute. I did note that after spending 4 months with my children, the first thing I'm going to do when I get off the call is buy the book Negotiating with Difficult People. So that's definitely one thing I've gotten out of this. But at this time, you can either ask a question via the chat function or just chime in. And I know we're going to have some interesting questions for you, David.
So Graham, do you want to moderate these questions? Just
Yeah,
spit them out.
be happy to. Okay, I'm going to kick us off, and then I'm going to expect I do cold call people like you do, David. But one question I have
Hey,
is,
Joanne Scott got peppered with questions. I was there for that. I know how you people roll. I know that.
we tend to warm up a little bit, so we'll
That's all right.
have some. But a question I have, in thinking about what we do in terms of our focus on children, and the stuff on the amygdala is fascinating to me. I've read a lot about that. There's a lot in the book Emotional Intelligence about the amygdala and how it works. What we're doing to children, for children at a young age, to try to help with this. I think I've seen this actually in New York public schools about implementing meditation practice to help control, calm down. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on what we're doing to teach this at a younger age to hopefully mitigate some of the circumstances we see down the road with volatility and anger and ultimately, hostage situations and other crises.
Yeah, sure. One of the things that I have been a champion of as a negotiator is to listen much more than you talk. Because if I'm listening, I'm hearing you. And I may not agree with what you have to say, but if we're going to have a productive dialogue, if we're actually going to have any hope of getting this resolved, I need to know what's important to you. I already know what's on my mind, and many people speak to be heard rather than engaging and listening. And in a classroom setting, whether it's at a law school, a college, a high school, a grammar school, kindergarten, pre-K, I think a lot of times there's a lot of airtime that's filled up by people that just feel like they need to speak. And that's perfectly fine if you want to recognize, validate, and empower somebody. But there needs to be some kind of a discussion. One of the things that I'm not a fan of, but this is gaining traction in New York, unfortunately, I guess, is a talking stick, where individuals actually will sit around and they'll pass an actual stick. And unless you are in possession of the stick, you cannot speak. And I'm not sure that among professionals, or at least adults, that's necessary. But then again, if you knew the people that I work with on a daily basis, you'd probably make the case for the talking stick. But I'm a huge fan of that. I think everybody needs to be heard because there's a certain human dignity that comes with that. Most people that we encounter in crisis, and most of the case studies from law enforcement, are individuals that have felt disenfranchised, emasculated, because again, it's a male phenomenon in many cases, that nobody cares, nobody wants to listen, their society's left behinds or cast aside. And Graham, I think that would be a wonderful thing to continue to teach the young children.
Okay. Other questions for David?
Maybe this is off the track of the discussion, but in light of the discussions that are going on nationwide about unfunding police departments and diverting that money into people who have been trained, you care to comment on that?
Sure. I am not a spokesperson for the New York City Police Department, and what I'm about to say is just the gospel of me. But we actually just had the defunding that occurred without rhyme or reason. Individuals called for $1 billion out of the $5.6 billion annual budget to be removed. It was broken down into two components of $500 million and $400 million. We took 1,100 recruits that would have started yesterday, July 1, the majority of whom are persons of color, male and female, that would have been the next generation of police officers, and we wiped out the entire class with no scripting. So when we talk about verbal de-escalation skills and mental health counseling and wanting to bring more social services there, I also teach at the John Jay College of Criminal Justice. And unsurprisingly, I'm pretty conversant with a lot of our statistics. There are 7 FBI crimes that we track. The one that anybody cares about on the national news is homicides. And for several years, we had been tracking below 400 in the mid 300s. The last 3 years, we got down to 319, 389. And we thought that we were going to stay under 300 last year. We didn't. And generally, shootings prefigure homicides because the most common means of killing somebody in New York City, as most places around the country and indeed around the world, is a firearm. So when shootings go up, so do homicides. And unfortunately, with the defunding, I don't think you're going to get anybody that's a knowledgeable expert. And I don't say this because I'm pro-cop. I say this because I'm an intelligent observer. I don't think there's any possible way that you could expect New York City will remain the city that it was. And the statistics that we boasted for the better part of the last 10 years with the current de-escalation and defunding that's going on. You need to have police officers. You need to have them trained. We report on exceptions. There are horrific examples of police brutality for which those officers should be rightly arrested. And Governor Andrew Cuomo, not a week ago, 2 weeks ago now, enacted a law that said that if you put an individual in a chokehold, that's a crime in the state of New York. And we had our first officer the other day who in Brooklyn, within 72 hours of that law being in effect, took down an individual who had taunted him for several minutes. The body cam photo captures the entire situation. But he took him to the ground and probably it got the better of him. He put the chokehold on for 30 seconds or so. He was charged and he's now facing 7 years in prison. So are things like that going to happen? Yeah. Well, law enforcement's a contact sport. Should it be? No. But at some point, police officers are not social workers. And when you ask somebody, please come with me, you don't have the right to resist arrest. That's just the law. And you can have a standoff. You should make talk work. But at some point, there's going to come a time that the police are not going to leave because there's a situation that requires resolution. And there's an individual who's chosen not to comply and thereby is breaking the law. And that's where it gets really dicey about where do you make the decision that talk's no longer going to work, but you have to go hands-on somebody.
David, we got a couple more questions here. Are there signals that may help us recognize an impending crisis situation?
Sure. So if we were talking about in the instance of, let's say, suicidality is the most common form of a barricade situation, if you talk with an individual who is only using past tense, if they're only reflecting on what's happened in their life, the trials, the travails, the challenges, and things that are happening, and there's no discussion of what tomorrow looks like, there's no plan for the future, that's a problem. In social media, you see a lot of seepage. In the field of active shooters, you frequently will see social media posts that will go out days or weeks in advance where somebody indicates they've taken an interest in firearms. or they have a particular dislike of an individual or an institution, or they start to articulate plans and their specificity. Those are all red flags. Something that I would not show in a mixed audience like today, but if you have the intestinal fortitude to watch, there's a video that's called Bud Dwyer, an Innocent Man. That's D-W-Y-E-R. Bud Dwyer in the early 1980s was the treasurer of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And Bud was indicted in something called the CT scandal. And it was basically a kickback scheme. Everybody that was indicted but Bud Dwyer pled guilty, took a guilty plea. Bud Dwyer went forward, was convicted, and before sentencing, the federal judge made extrajudicial, so outside of the courtroom statements, that he was going to impose a draconian sentence on Bud Dwyer, who steadfastly maintained his innocence and said he had not done these things. On a particular morning, Bud Dwyer dropped his kids off at school and at 10 a.m. called a press conference. He had live cameras in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania on. People came around. He started reading off a statement of everybody he wanted to thank in his life. Everything was past tense. The fop sweat started to break out in his brow. The speed of his delivery increased. He cut off the prepared statement. He started handing out envelopes to people, including one to an individual for his wife. And he took out a .357 Magnum and removed the top of his head on live television. For those that know the 90s alternative rock band Filter, there's a song called Nice Shot. That's about the R. Bud Dwyer story. So if you want to see an example that speaks to classic warning signs that somebody in that room should have realized and didn't, R. Bud Dwyer, An Innocent Man, available on YouTube, both in the edited and extremely graphic format, would be a great example of that, but it is not for the squeamish.
Another question we have, what damage do you believe is done to children's minds playing all the violent video games available now and television shows that parents allow children to watch? Are they more aggressive?
Tremendous violence. People have become, and this is not just children. I've been a professional educator for 16 years, a full-time law professor for 10 of them. And I can tell you that I've watched children become young adults, become college students at John Jay, or become law students at Seton Hall, Georgetown, Fordham, Cardozo, everywhere else that I've taught. And, you know, there's a Jewish theologian by the name of Martin Buber, who used to say that every I-thou relationship ultimately devolves to an I-it relationship. And that's because when you no longer see a human being as a person, you objectify her or him. And when you sit there and play first-person shooter video games, and the idea is to put up a body count, well, that's where, if you do the post-mortem, the psychological autopsies from many of the active shooters that we're dealing with, they all go back and appreciate the consequences of their action. It just seems like some kind of heroic, glorified role where you're always going for the high count. All of these active shooters, almost without exception, are painfully aware. The Christchurch shooter in New Zealand, to give you a more recent example, all know what the high body count is, and they want a gun for that number one spot because it's a video game to them. They're not processing it, that there's a human being and I'm going to inflict great sadness on them, their community, their families. I think the video games are massively destructive. Back in the 1980s, for those that are old enough to remember with me that time, Ronald Reagan came out, was one of the first champions of video games because he thought, particularly for the military and the Air Force, hand-eye coordination and mental acuity was improved with video games. But I don't think President Reagan would ever have envisioned the kind of glorification of violence that we have today. I'm sure he would walk that statement back today.
Yeah, I've got one more. I got to be hard on you, David. I got to grill here. But one of the things I found interesting over the years have been sort of the post-violent episodes off of well-known hostage situations. For example, by the Waco standoff and by the Ruby Ridge standoff. And there's actually a really, perhaps this is an FBI question, but involving the government, police. Is there then an alert to, to be thinking that some of these extreme groups may react to that?
Again, I'll say that I do not speak on behalf of the NYPD or the FBI or anybody but myself in this capacity. But I will tell you that I have been an invited guest at a number of the counterterrorism presentations. that the NYPD puts on. And if you look at extremist groups throughout the United States, whether you're talking Antifa on the left or the sovereign citizens on the right or anybody in between, those groups are proliferating. And if you look at the statements that they've made, there are those who have actually opined. And again, I don't think I'm telling tales out of school. The 2016 presidential election, there were credible threats. There would have been against President Trump and in favor of Mrs. Clinton. There are those that harbor those very real concerns for what's going to happen in November. So there is an argument, I guess, to be made, at least among the law enforcement community, that the 2016 election actually saved a number of lives because of its statement.
I found this presentation fascinating. I hope our group did. Maybe a virtual round of applause for Professor White here. And as a thanks, we're going to be making a donation in your name here to Big Brothers Big Sisters of Indianapolis, who I think fits in somewhat with your presentation in terms of mentoring young people who provide children facing adversity with strong and enduring, professionally supported one-on-one relationships. So we'll be sending you that certificate, but making a nice donation in your name to Big Brothers Big Sisters.
Thank you, Graham, and thank you to the Kiwanis. It's been my honor to be with you here today.
And I'm going to ask Taylor to send David this link. We are actually having a Kiwanis meeting in August focused on Eva Core and a very special announcement. So would love you to join us again. And I really appreciate your friendship and taking time to do this.
Thank you, Graham. Thank you, everyone.
Okay. Reminder, next week, July 9th, we will have Matt Taylor, the voice of the Indianapolis Colts, with us. And I'm sure that'll be a fascinating discussion as well about what's going to go on here in the fall. And wish everybody a great week. If you want to stick around for a few minutes and socialize, talk about your July 4th plans, you're welcome to. Richard, want to welcome you. Great having you in the club, and Godspeed, everybody. Have a great weekend and happy 4th of July.